Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now what we have here is the first desktop successor to the Intel Pentium lineup. It's called the Processor 300. It's based on the 1700 socket and at the time of this video it cost me £79 on Amazon, the same price as the i3-12100F, rendering it completely pointless. Thanks for watching. Seriously though, I'm always interested to check out these entry-level offerings, and this 2-core 4-thread CPU is no exception. Realistically, dual-core processors don't really have a place in 2024, but I've found that this one is actually more than fine for everyday basic usage. It can even handle gaming, albeit with a few hiccups. First though, let's run through what we get in the box. We have the Intel 300 itself, which has a frequency of 3.9 GHz and a 46 watt TDP. The box cooler will be more than adequate, and it's nice to see a copper base here as well. I really like the look of Intel's stock coolers these days, to be honest. It was almost silent atop this CPU in operation, and even under load, the fan barely span any faster. Let's move on to gaming, because although this wasn't designed for it, some of the following results were quite surprising. The 2 cores this thing does have are pretty strong, pretty capable, but there's not enough of them here to allow for a consistent experience. I've paired the Intel Processor 300 with an RTX 4060 today, which is more than enough for our CPU to reach its maximum potential. The first result, Counter-Strike 2, was actually pretty good. 146 FPS on average with somewhat respectable percentile numbers. It was certainly playable. This chip doesn't boost beyond the base frequency, it's just 3.9 GHz, and that's it. By the way, no turbo for this thing. Elden Ring up next. We couldn't quite hit the 60 FPS cap, but we came pretty close. Again, and as expected, there were a few dips and drops, but nothing significant. Some older generation i5s would probably do worse than this, to be honest, but that's a video for another day. Baldur's Gate 3 also averaged 50 something, though there were a few more noticeable stutters and frame time issues, especially in and around the city. The 300 is impressive considering it's a dual core part, but because of the price, it doesn't make sense to me, even if you're not gaming. If where you live it's like half the price of the i3 and you just want to build a basic computer, then maybe. I can certainly see this thing making its way into a lot of entry-level OEM machines. Starfield is notoriously demanding, and despite the clear problems here, it was nice to see at least 30 FPS on average. This would probably feel a lot better to play with an FPS cap in place, but there will still be problems. Forza Horizon 5 is more GPU intensive from what I've experienced, and as such it runs with over 100 FPS even with the Processor 300 in the system. Sure, there were moments of slight slowdown, but it was certainly playable. Again, I know this isn't a gaming CPU, but it's just nice to see 2 cores and 4 threads playing the latest titles as if we're back in the days of the legendary Pentium G4560. GTA 5 is a good few years old now, and as such there aren't many issues with this one. The usual dip and drop here and there, especially in busier areas of Los Santos, but nothing to complain about really. This is a horrible mismatch in reality. The 4060 is sitting back and relaxing most of the time, but at least we're letting this 2-core beast really stretch its legs. This is where things once again get a little tricky for the 300. Cyberpunk achieved a somewhat decent average of 50 frames per second, and will run at its best when we're exploring the outskirts of Night City. As things start to heat up, however, and we venture into more crowded spaces with pedestrians and traffic, the frame times will really drop. It's a good effort from the CPU nonetheless. Before we talk about comparative results, let's finalise these gameplay benchmarks with Red Dead Redemption 2. This also had an OK average, and this time around there weren't really any stutters or sudden drops. The game just slowed down a bit overall when we rode through Valentine or any other heavily populated towns or cities. The game still felt somewhat consistent, but the performance as a whole dipped a little. Now you might be wondering, how does this new CPU compare with the previous and last Pentium, the G7400, as well as the cheapest modern i3, the 12100F? Well, here are a few results. In terms of CPU performance, the 300 and G7400 are very similar, with the new CPU pulling ahead as expected thanks to the slightly increased clock speed. The 2 cores are the limitation in both cases. The i3 is faster in both the single and multi Cinebench test, and it's much faster when it comes to rendering. For games, we'll start with Starfield. I've picked 4 pretty CPU intensive games for these comparisons. As you'll see throughout, the Pentium and Processor 300 are similar again, but the i3 pulls ahead by quite some margin thanks to the extra cores and threads. There are still some issues in busier areas, but it's a lot more consistent overall. All the chips average over 100 FPS in pairing with the 4060 in Forza Horizon 5, but the 300 takes the lead in the race for the best dual core. In fact, the Processor 300 is probably, at this point, the best 2-core CPU you can buy, which isn't the most impressive accolade in the world, but it is worth noting. In GTA 5 it's a similar story, but once again the i3 is the best of the bunch. There may be an even larger performance increase with a faster GPU, but in terms of a real world build, I wouldn't go with anything more capable than this, as the extra graphical power would essentially be wasted a lot of the time. Finally, we have Cyberpunk. The 300 does a slightly better job than the Pentium, but you're a lot more likely to find a used G7400 at a lower price, and if you want a 2-core chip for whatever reason, there's probably no sense in going with the newer one over the older one, unless you need 192GB of RAM support instead of the measly 128 gigs max that the G7400 offers. Speaking of RAM, you can use either DDR4 or DDR5 with any of these processors. The integrated UHD 710 graphics have also received a slight speed increase according to the Intel site as well, but we've tested those before with the Pentium and there probably won't be much of a difference, if any. I'm happy to test them again though, if you want me to. Overall, the new Intel Processor 300 is impressive for what it is. It's interesting to see 2 cores and 4 threads running games in 2024. That said, if it costs the same as the i3, which is more capable in every way, apart from the integrated graphics, which it doesn't have, then it's not worth it. Even if it's a lot cheaper but you want to play games, it just doesn't make sense. I've certainly had fun testing it though, and this won't be the last you see of it, that's for sure. As always, be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments section. What do you think of this new Intel CPU? Does it interest you as a product? Well, of course, let me know down below. In the next one, we'll probably be recreating the Ultimate Bottleneck Experience, the Ultimate Bottleneck Experience 3.0, where we'll pair this with something really high-end and see if gaming at a higher resolution can help improve things. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you again very soon.